Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstat, Cashman Equipment, DeCastro Verde Law Group, Valley Electric Association, and additional supporting sponsors.
Welcome to Nevada Week. Thank you for being with us. I'm Casey Smith. One of the most important things the Nevada legislature will tackle when the 80th session opens will be education funding. The funding formula is complex, and the focus of this show is to break it down in layman's terms so it can be better understood. Joining us to discuss are Anna Slighting, a teacher in the Clark County School District and the policy director for Hope for Nevada; Mike Tack, a teacher and parent at Fremont Professional Development Middle School; Raymond LeBeff, the principal at Mountain View Christian Schools; and Amanda Morgan, the legal director at Educate Nevada Now. Thank you all for joining us. A very important discussion we're going to have, and we're looking forward to it. All right, Amanda, I want to start with you. On a per pupil basis, a general per pupil basis, how does our state rank in public funding compared to other states?
Not good. We've been pretty bad, and we've been bad for a while. Back in the 70s, we were actually at the top of the list for school funding. And just over the years, we've just slowly gotten worse and worse. So we typically rank about 48th in the nation. Depending on what study it is, it can be as low as 51st in the nation. So we're not looking good.
What is the general per pupil average as of the latest data?
So if you look at all expenditures, so that includes what the state provides, what local governments provide, what the federal government provides, we're at about 8,500 per pupil on average statewide. Depending on where you live or what school your child goes to, that can vary quite a bit. But that's the basic general per pupil average.
And you say that's 46th, 47th, down to 51st, depending on the study.
Yeah, the average school district, or the average for across the nation is about 12,600 per pupil. So we're well below that. And then some of the states that do very well, it could be 18,000, 20,000 per pupil.
Okay, Anna, you're a teacher and a parent with children in the school system. As a parent, how do you see the per pupil average impacting your child's education?
Well, as a mother, of course, I want what's best for my own children, but as a teacher, I also realize the vast need that exists for all of Nevada's children, and I want the best for them as well. And I see our low per pupil funding is severely restricting the opportunity for all of those children.
Are there specific gaps you see with lack of funding is very, very evident? Are there specific programs or resources that are well supported, on the other hand?
Well, classes are crowded, teachers are stressed, administration is overworked, and all of these are a formula for disaster in order to identify and provide supports for the children who need them equitably need access to education. Specifically, I would look at students like the English language learners and special ed kids and gifted students, because if they're not in a school that's receiving additional funding, then those schools are not, they don't have the same resources and the equitable resources that they need to provide the education for those students.
Okay, Amanda, back to you for a moment. The Nevada Plan is what is commonly referenced when talking about public education funding. In layman's terms, that is, what is the Nevada Plan?
Well, it's difficult to put in layman's terms. It's incredibly, incredibly complicated.
That's why you're here.
Yeah, I'll do my best. But essentially what the Nevada Plan does is kind of twofold. First, it's the way in which our state decides, well, what is that big pot of funding that we're going to actually dedicate to schools? So that's the first part of it. How that works is they simply look at what they spent last year and roll it up by inflation. That's it. Pretty simple. It gets a little more complicated when we talk about how they divide the funding between the different districts. So they might look at a district and say, wow, they're really rural, they have higher cost, they might not have as many students in their schools, but they still need to have all that kind of staff and administration. They might have really incredible transportation costs that they have to deal with. So they might say that district might need additional funds versus a district that's maybe closer together, doesn't have those kind of transportation costs, and has more students. So kind of that economies of scale. But in a nutshell, that's really how the Nevada Plan operates.
As economies of scale go, Clark County is huge compared to every other district in the state. Is it equitable?
So between districts, it's actually quite equitable. In fact, the 2018 Quality Counts Report gave us a B on equity because it does take into account the varying costs that districts face. So kind of looking at how much, for example, local taxes that a small county can raise. It says, okay, they don't have taxing capacity. How can we help them out with all their high expenses? As far as equity as it relates to different demographics or high needs students such as ELL students, students that English isn't their first language, or students that are in poverty that might require additional services, we don't do such a good job on equity because the Nevada plan just doesn't account for those students.
Okay, the multi-million-dollar question. As a taxpayer, where does the money for the Nevada plan come from?
A variety of sources. So some of it is state funding. So, think about the sales tax and the commerce tax and all those different taxes that go into the big state general fund pot. Other state funding includes the 15% wholesale marijuana tax, the room tax increase that passed in 2009. So those are some of the state funding sources. The local funding sources include property taxes. So when you pay your property tax bill, that goes to education, or there's even a part of the sales tax that's considered a local tax. So it's a variety of sources, and typically the more local taxes that your district can raise, the less state funding you will receive through the Nevada plan.
Okay, so if the Nevada plan makes the school funding equitable, how is the state calculating funding across our very socioeconomically diverse communities and districts and counties?
Not well. In fact, up until 2013, they did not account for those students at all. Just very recently, we've created what are called categorical or restricted use programs, where you'd say, wow, this school has a high number of English learners or low-income students. We'll provide them additional funding as kind of a grant just for that school, just to address certain needs for those students. But there really isn't any, that's a great step. It's great that we started that in 2013, but it just addresses a fraction of the students that actually have those needs. So on the whole, Nevada really hasn't been addressing those needs, but they have moved towards starting to address those needs, those kinds of needs with things like, you might have heard of Zoom schools or Victory schools,
right.
But kind of these restricted use type programs.
So what are Zoom and Victory for the viewers?
Sure. So a Zoom school is a school that has a high concentration of English language learners. So these are students that English might be a second language, or they can't speak what's called the academic language of English. They might be able to speak conversational English, but not really know how to talk about science in English. So certain schools that have a high density of those students might have been selected by the state to receive additional funds, and it's called a Zoom school. They have to use those dollars for certain things, like, you can't just use it on anything. You have to use it for certain services, and it's very restrictive, but it was a step towards addressing some of the needs of those high concentration schools.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mike, you're a middle school teacher and a member of your school's school organizational team. Now, what is, first of all, a school organizational team, and what kind of oversight does that team have on budgets and the allocation of funding for your school?
Absolutely. Well, the school organizational team came about with the reorganization of CCSD, and the idea was to give schools more autonomy over their budgets. So basically, whereas before the school district would have a department maybe for landscaping, for example, the long-range goal is to give the schools the ability to choose who would do their landscaping, like on a very simple basis. So basically what we receive is we receive a budget from the school district, and that is going to be just basically general funds. And that is where the school organizational team has the most influence, is over how that is spent. Because as was mentioned before, with the categorical funding, we're also a Zoom school, so we receive those funds for our ELL population. Much of that money is already predetermined as to where it can go. It needs to be used for activities and classes and programs and equipment that will help our English language learners. So basically, at the SOT level, we have ratification power. We're able to, say, approve funding for certain positions or for supply expenditures and things of that nature. But really, there's not a lot of additional options we have available to us at this time. So
what does the per pupil base funding pay for at your school?
Primarily, it's going to be teachers and supplies, staffing and supplies. So that could be our support staff, that could be teachers and administrators, paper, all supplies that we need as a school. And that number is dependent on our enrollment because it is a per pupil number. And so each year there's a count day at which time the school district takes count of how many students you have enrolled. And that number can fluctuate. As it fluctuates, it can affect our budget. So for example, if we're projected to have 1,000 students in the building and we only have 800, we can lose significant funds and thus lose teachers, programs, and money for supplies.
So does the base funding cover all your school's costs, and can the money go to pay for computers, for instance, or what else can it go for?
We are very reliant on our categorical funds. We use the Zoom money to help make sure that we have sufficient number of teachers to keep the class sizes low. Our English language learners in particular really benefit from smaller class sizes. It allows a teacher to be able to work on a more individual basis with our students, provides more flexibility in terms of grouping. We can let the students learn in different ways. And so as far as does the allotted amount cover everything? Not really. We really do need those Zoom funds in order to make sure that we have enough staff and computers and technology to really service our students well.
And it's a year-to-year basis. It's a scramble, an accounting nightmare, I would assume, right?
It can change. We get a projected budget in the beginning of the year, usually around January or February, and then that can change very early in the school year in August or September, depending on how the count comes back.
Additionally, also how the legislative session turns out, and that is something that I see as a disadvantage to categorical funds. I really like how Amanda calls them restricted use funds, because there's so many limitations to it, including that it has to be renewed with every legislative session. So they're risky. You never know if you're going to get those money back. You never know how you're supposed to be budgeting, and the timelines just don't match up, and there's a lot of problems with that.
Raymond, let's go to you now. Okay, private school funding. Where does the money come from to fund your school?
It's primarily tuition driven. And from that, we have, my responsibility along with our Executive Director of Operations is to fundraise to make it affordable so that we can give scholarship grants and additional support funding to our community. We're located on the east side of Las Vegas. Desert Pines is on one side across the street, Gregson's on the other side. We have a lot of charter schools that have opened in our area. A lot of English second language learners have applied to our school to come, and we have seen an opportunity for them to succeed in an environment that is private, that speaks the language of not only education but the language of college. That's the outcome, and that's where you're going. And we go K through 12.
Okay, that was the next question. And follow-up: do you receive public school funding too?
We receive some Title I and Title II funding, which is categorical funding. It's based on zip codes, so the students that are eligible in the zip codes in which they live are eligible for those funds. The Title I funds help students with specifically things such as tutoring. And our school day is a longer school day. We go from 8 till 3:30, but our school is open from 6 to 6. And so what we'll do is we'll require a lot of our students to stay after or come before the normal school day to get them up to the place they need to be academically. And those Title I funds support that. The Title II funds support the expansion of our programs. Specifically, in the past 2 years, it's been increasing the opportunity for students to become exposed to STEM and all the options that are in STEM programs.
Do you have an estimate of how many low-income students you have at your school that are eligible?
Well, currently, what's interesting is through the Opportunity Scholarship Program, which I know we're going to talk to about in a little bit, but we've had an increase in the amount of students that have been able to come with low-income students. And we now have over 100 students in our school that are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And in the 23 years that I've been there at the school, that is a significant shift as far as being able to provide an opportunity for a wide range of students, because we have students that come from all over the valley that come to our school. Most
people wouldn't think that the free and reduced lunch program in private schools is happening, yet it really is.
Yeah, over 100 students, and it's something that's really been able to provide, for our kitchen services and our cafeteria. We're able to provide 3 meals for our students, because we are open from 6 to 6, and we have a program where we're able to provide that service to our community.
Just for comparison, I want to add, so I am surprised by that, definitely. But our school, which is a public school, we're 100% free and reduced lunch. Our student population is very high poverty.
And that's where we're located, all of the schools that are at 100% poverty, they're all within 2-3 miles of our school. That's the kind of demographic of where we're located as a private school.
Okay, Amanda, let's talk about some supplemental funding, okay? Okay, we've heard a lot about the marijuana tax money. That's been in the news a lot. Property taxes, you mentioned, hotel, gaming taxes figure in. How much is allocated to education from these sources on an annual basis?
Well, between the different marijuana revenue sources, so it's a little complicated because there's two different marijuana sources. There's the 15% excise tax that everyone voted on at the 2016 ballot. That is going into education. There's the 2009 room tax that was not voted on, but presented by voters to the legislature, and that was passed. And then there's a retail tax that never actually went to education, that went into the rainy day fund. So that's a marijuana retail tax. So taking out the retail tax, because that's not actually going into the education funding pot, we're looking at about $250 million a year between the room tax, the room tax funding, IP1 funding, and the 15% excise tax on marijuana. So it's a pretty big chunk of change. As far as it being supplementary or adding to the overall pie of education funding, that has simply not happened. As I mentioned before, the only way that we calculate what we're going to spend on schools is we look at what we spent last year and roll it up by inflation. It doesn't matter what funding sources go into that pie or into that cup or whatever analogy you want to use, they're just looking to fill it up. So if other revenue sources come in, like the room tax or like marijuana taxes, the state can say, okay, good, now we filled up the cup, we can use our state general fund contribution on something else. So none of that has actually increased the pot. The per pupil funding.
Right.
If you look at the basic support guarantee, which is the state's per pupil contribution, it's remained flat. Through the commerce tax, through the room tax, through marijuana taxes, it actually hasn't gone up because the Nevada plan doesn't really care about where the revenue comes from. It just cares about the historical expenditure, what it spent last year.
Anna, you mentioned the legislature. On a previous show, we had State Senator, soon-to-be County Commissioner Tick Sagerblum say that he wanted to get it changed so the retail tax does go to schools more. Is there a movement to get that changed in the legislature in the next session that you know of?
There's definitely a movement to change that as well. I also agree that we need to see a change in the Nevada plan and the way that is written, because even if all of this marijuana money goes back into the Nevada plan, the way that Amanda just explained it, we're still not going to see an increase unless we revise that plan. And yes, there is an appetite among different nonprofits and organizations to do both.
Mike,
one of those nonprofits that I've worked with closely is Nevadans for the Common Good. And on Monday, they just actually had an event that we were both at where they explained some of these funding sources and how those decisions are made. And I think one of the really important things that I learned there, I was not aware of, is that the historical funding model really disincentivizes the saving of money, because what it really means is what you spent last year is what you're going to get this year. So if you do save money, our SOT, that is one thing that our school organizational team does on a local basis, is we try to save as much money as we can to save for a rainy day in case our counts come down and we have to have some money to support another teacher. At the district level, however, if the district does not spend all the money that it gets, it doesn't get that same money again. And so if you're basing your funding on what happened last year, it really disincentivizes trying to save money and prepare for a future rainy day at the district level.
And does it change in some ways, maybe doing something fiscally more responsible or more creative in a manner where you just have to spend the funds on just to spend them so you get them back?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
That's my understanding. I'm new to it, but
because the reality is, it's a private school, I'm a business, so that is like contrary to what I do as a
Right.
business. If I can save $1, I'm going to save $1 and then try to motivate someone else to save 10 or whatever the case may be.
So in other words, if you want more books for your school, you need to spend X amount this year to make sure you get that same amount next year.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, total funding. So yeah, if let's say the district was like, you know what, we're going to put $1 million aside at the end of the year. Well, the state is going to say, oh, you didn't spend $1 million. Great. So you didn't need that. So you're not going to get it the next year. So there's so many reasons. And just to add on to that, we're only one of 2 states that use that model to fund our schools. Us in Nebraska. Mm-hmm. So it's actually quite unique that we're still kind of looking at what we spent last year to determine what we're going to spend the following year. And we've been using that model since 1967.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It does not take into consideration at all what it actually costs to educate a child, and that is something that I would really like to see looked at when we're talking about budgets and we're talking about revising the Nevada plan. Is what do these costs actually what are those costs? What does it really take? And to look at the specific child and what their needs are.
Raymond, your school is on one of the top, is one of the state's top recipients of opportunity scholarships. What exactly is an opportunity scholarship, and how is your school using that funding?
The Opportunity Scholarship was created in 2015 in the legislative session. It comes from outside support through the modified business tax. So businesses that want to give to the Opportunity Scholarship program, students that are eligible have to be 300% of the poverty line or lower. They give to scholarship granting organizations, and parents who would like to take advantage of those scholarships to use the funds for private schools or for distance learning or different costs, they apply to the scholarship granting organizations. They receive the award, and once they receive the award, it's their choice of where they use the funds.
Amanda, is that considered part of the Nevada plan, the Opportunity Scholarship?
No, it's completely outside the Nevada plan. And just to be clear, even though it's kind of the states are providing funding to these scholarship organizations, they receive a tax break for doing so. So the state is still technically funding Opportunity Scholarship programs. Some of the challenges with that is right now there's not really a good way to tell if it's working. Like your school might be incredible, but on the whole, we don't really have good outcome data to make sure that these students are actually succeeding. And Opportunity Scholarship programs in other states have had very mixed results, and in some cases, students actually doing worse in achievement with these programs. So I think we just have to be careful. We have promising schools that make us think, okay, maybe this could work, but then we kind of have to think about there might be some other instances where it might not actually be successful.
Well, what we've seen too, and I couldn't agree with you more on that, because you need accountability to say, okay, if we're going to donate, even a business that's going to donate into the Opportunity Scholarship program.
And do you see a lot of that?
They want, well, the accountability is a standpoint of it's twofold. One, it's the customer. The customer is going to go somewhere else if they don't feel like their child's getting serviced education-wise, et cetera. Secondly, we do yearly Stay 9 Terra Nova testing, which shows testing results of where our students are at. We are college preparatory school all the way through, so each dynamic is one in which if a student's not reading at grade level, they're pulled out, like I talked about earlier with the funding or the tutoring, that's a requirement for them to get at grade level while they're there. We have a 100% graduation rate based upon the intervention that we have with our students and our families. Because we have a requirement of all families interviewing to come into our school, we have that cooperative and input from parents. As you know, parental input and parents being a part of a child's education is one of the biggest impacts. So when you have behavioral changes or academic changes that are needed, you want that partnership with the parents to say, this is what needs to be done to be successful. Those things we're accountable to those families that are there. We want their child where they need to be, but they're also seeing if we're doing our job. And if they're not, they're going to take their business elsewhere.
Okay. So, Anna and Mike, you're not only educators, you're also very informed parents. What are your recommendations for parents in the public school system who might not be as engaged as they want to be, but as they should be, but want to be now? How does a parent get more involved?
I would love to answer that first. And plus, you've already mentioned Nevada's for a Common Good. And my advice, I get that question a lot. And my advice is find a nonprofit that aligns with your values. And whether it's Nevada's for a Common Good, Educate Nevada Now, HOPE, the CCSD Parents has a great Facebook page. Find a group that aligns with your values and follow them, because most of these groups provide legislative updates, they provide education on how to get involved, they provide all kinds of, and calls to action during the legislative session, and so they will keep you informed of those things that are important to you.
Mike?
Well, I'd say that's very important. I think that a lot of people would see that advice as being so big. Most people, I mean, we're a social media society, and we like things that are kind of quick and easy. And so I would say to start at the local level. And, speaking of social media, I can't help, the first question was, how do you as a parent see some of the shortages? Well, it's become almost a joke that at the beginning of the year, you're going to get a supply list that's about yay long from your, especially elementary teachers who really need supplies. So I would say if you really want to get involved, it helps to be a part of the school community. If you can, to volunteer in the classroom, talk to the teacher and find out what things they need. Get on the SOT.
Last word, Amanda, quickly, how can parent and teacher voices be heard in the upcoming legislature to get some of these problems solved?
Oh, this is such a great legislative session for parents and teachers to get involved. I've been at a few different forums lately where lawmakers are like, please reach out to us. We love hearing from parents and teachers. They want to hear your voice. We're in a unique state where this is a citizens' legislature. You know, you could have people's phone numbers on speed dial. I mean, they want to hear from you. So, you know, it's definitely the time. Get involved with a group, testify at an upcoming committee meeting, figure out what you really want, using these groups as resources.
And it's also the time that we have to say goodbye. Listen, we'd like to thank all of you, all of our guests, Anna Slighting, teacher in the Clark County School District and Policy Director for Hope for Nevada, Mike Tack, a teacher and parent at Fremont Professional Development Middle School, Raymond LeBeuf, the principal at Mountain View Christian Schools, and Amanda Morgan, the legal director at Educate Nevada Now. If you'd like to learn more about any of the topics discussed here on Nevada Week, or you have a topic or question you'd like us to explore, visit our website, find us on social media, or email the show. That's it for this edition of Nevada Week. I'm Casey Smith. Thank you very much for spending part of your Nevada Week with Vegas PBS. See you next time.